Good afternoon, everyone. How's the sound? Sound check? It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 27th Annual Awards Ceremony to present the Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism in memory of Newton Arvin. This distinguished award, the largest annual cash prize for literary criticism in the English language, honors a great work of recent literary criticism in the name of the brilliant and celebrated writer Truman Capote and his good friend, the critic and scholar Newton Arvin. Since 1996, we have come together here at the Old Capitol for the presentation of this prestigious prize, which Capote stipulated in his will must be administered by writers to a critic. The Writers' Workshop is honored to house this prize. In addition to funding the Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism, the Truman Capote Literary Trust is also a generous benefactor of the Iowa Writers' Workshop, funding 6 Truman Capote Fellowships annually. This year, Truman Capote Literary Trustees Alan and Louise Schwartz were unable to fly to Iowa City for the ceremony, but they will be viewing these events from Los Angeles. We are very happy that their dear friend and dear friend of the workshop, Maggie Conroy, will be presenting the award in their absence. It is an honor to first introduce University of Iowa Executive Vice President and Provost, Kevin Craigle, who will be speaking on this occasion. Dr. Craigle earned a bachelor's degree and doctorate in physiology and biophysics from the University of Iowa. He held an NIH postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Arizona. In 1993, Dr. Craigle joined the faculty here at the university. He's a full professor. He was departmental executive officer in the Department of Health and Human Physiology prior to his appointment as provost. Dr. Craigle has been a collegiate fellow at the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, associate editor of the Journal of Applied Physiology, chair of the Science Policy Commission at the American Physiological Society, and on the Board of Trustees for the Association of the Assessment and Accreditation of Animal Care International. He is currently serving as president of the Federation of American Societies of Experimental Biology. Dr. Craigle was appointed executive vice president and provost of the University of Iowa in February 2021, after serving as interim executive vice president and provost since July 2020, executive vice provost and senior associate provost for faculty since July 2019, and as an associate provost for the faculty since September 2014. Please welcome Provost Craigle.
Thank you, Sam. I apologize for that length. We're keeping you away from the champagne here, I think, so we'll try to shorten this up. So I want to welcome everyone. And on behalf of President Wilson and the university, I just want to say what a great honor it is for the university to administer the Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism and also to host this annual event in honor of the recipient. This extraordinary prize from the Truman Capote Literary Trust, as Sam noted, celebrates and encourages excellence in the field in a truly spectacular way. The past recipients we've had include some of the most well-respected, well-known, and admired literary critics, thinkers, and writers of the past 30 years. And it's a special pleasure to come together to welcome another distinguished scholar to that elite list. In addition to reflecting Capote's wish to recognize and promote first-rate scholarship and writing, the prize honors Capote's own remarkable literary legacy, as does the Capote Literary Trust generous support for writing fellowships, as Sam noted. The Truman Capote Fellowships have supported some of the most exceptional, talented writers in the University of Iowa's Writers' Workshop. Past Capote Fellows have published 8 books of fiction just in the last year or so alone, and they continue to garner recognition from the wider literary world, with recent examples including the Dylan Thomas Prize and the Republic of Consciousness Prize. These gifts from the Trust and the Trust's longstanding relationship with the university are a tribute to the talent and the reputation of the workshop faculty, staff, students, and alumni. They reaffirm the workshop as a center of the literary world, and we're certainly very proud of that status. These gifts also benefit not only the writers of literary criticism, but also emerging writers in fiction and poetry, also students of literature, and generations of future readers who will receive these writers' great works. We're proud to partner with the Literary Trust to bring those benefits to readers and writers alike, and we're grateful to the Trust for their faith in us as keepers of that important legacy. This year, the prize is awarded to Dr. R.A. Judy, Professor of Critical and Cultural Studies at the University of Pittsburgh, and this is for his book, Sentient Flesh. We're very pleased to have him here today and look forward to his comments. I know all of you join me in thanking Dr. Judy for his invaluable contribution to this field of scholarship that Capote certainly valued. And we're also happy to hear about his insights and his reflections on this award. I want to thank all of you for coming out to join us in celebrating Dr. Judy and the Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism. Thank you.
I am now delighted to introduce Maggie Conroy, who will present the 2023 Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism to R.A. Judy for his book Sentient Flesh, Thinking in Disorder, Poesis and Black. Longtime friend of Truman Capote Literary Trustees Louise and Alan Schwartz, Maggie Conroy has been a supporter of the Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism in memory of Newton Arvin since its inception. She has been present at almost every awards ceremony since she and her late husband, the renowned writer and 18-year director of the Writers' Workshop, Frank Conroy, first joined with the Schwartzes to announce the award in New York, in the New York Times in 1994. A gifted actor and playwright, Maggie received her MFA from the University of Iowa Playwriting Studio and has served as artistic director of the International Writing Program. Please welcome Maggie Conroy.
Oh, great. In 1994, Alan Schwartz, a friend and literary executive for Truman Capote, announced the formation of a prize in memory of Newton Arvin, a literary critic, a known biographer of Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Walt Whitman. He was an academic and a longtime lover of Truman Capote's. He taught at Smith College for 38 years until 1960, losing his job when his homosexuality became public knowledge. Alan Schwartz has said, "It was always Truman's intention that all his posthumous royalties be collected for the continuing benefit of writers." Alan and Louise Schwartz, trustees, are unable to attend today's ceremony, and this is a disappointment, especially as Louise was an enthusiastic supporter of the prize and the workshop, and she would remind all teachers to add the works of Truman Capote to their class reading lists. And I am honored that the Writers' Workshop invited me to present the Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism in memory of Newton Arvin, with this $30,000 check to R.A. Judy for his book, Sentient Flesh, Thinking in Disorder, Poesis in Black.
Professor Tracy Morris will introduce R.A. Judy. Professor Morris is an interdisciplinary poet and performance artist. She was born in Brooklyn and first emerged in the early 1990s Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York City. In 1993, she won the Nuyorican Grand Slam Championship as well as the National Haiku Championship. She earned an MFA in poetry from Hunter College and a PhD in performance studies from New York University. Her sound installations have been presented at the MoMA, the Jamaican Center for Learning, Whitney Biennial, and other venues. In 2016, she co-edited The Best American Experimental Writing with Charles Bernstein. She has received fellowships from the New York Foundation for the Arts, Creative Capital, and the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation. She has been a tenured professor at the Iowa Writers Workshop since 2020. Please welcome Professor Morris.
Hi. Wow. This is a thing. I was nervous. And I've performed like a lot, but I'm like, right, Judy, Iowa. Invisible string. Some of my students will get that joke. I'm honored to present a few brief opening remarks for R.A. Judy, this year's Iowa Writers Workshop Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism in memory of Newton Arvin awardee. This award, one of, if not the most prestigious of the IWW, and one of the most renowned of the University of Iowa, as well as of arts and letters overall, is a fitting one for R.A. Judy's extraordinary work, Sentient Flesh. To quote another Truman Capote Literary Criticism Award winner, Fred Moten, in his comments on the back cover endorsement of the book Sentient Flesh, Sentient Flesh forces, quote, forces and allows its readers to do more, confront more, read more, and think more. I am undone and disturbed and disrupted and transported by this book, unquote. Judy's extraordinary muscular work encapsulates aspects of an empowered, brilliant, and free mind. It is unrestricted from assumptions about race and oppression, even as it delves unblinkingly into its shocking harm. Sentient Flesh shows us in its elegance and power the supple mind of R.A. Judy's incalculable prowess, yes. But I could not help but also think about how much we, as a society, lose and have lost by the suppression of so many, their potentiality undermined because they were not free, not understood, destroyed, made ashamed, assumed to be less, and therefore, so are we. But I jump ahead of myself in my deep sorrow, one of many emotions I felt as I sought to work through this book, a work that is to be sipped slowly rather than gulped and assessed quickly. Each turn of a paragraph and pages are poetic, yes, but also literally stunning, literally breathtaking, literally soulful. In addition to the sweep and commitment to invigorating thought in Sentient Flesh that encourages a diligence to specificity and its service as synecdoche, there is such extraordinary feeling in the palimpsest current that grounds the text. I think about this work, I feel this work as part of a discussion of great work overall, and with other previous Truman Capote awardees whose work I've come to know, including Moten, Brent Hayes Edwards, Susan Stewart, and Helen Vendla, who present sophisticated literary criticism in the context of poetics, vision, storytelling, music, and the centrality of arts and letters, the diversity of thought in our everyday lives and in the life of the mind. Sentient Flesh engages in multiple languages, genres, scholarly disciplines, cultural communities, art practices, times, places, and people that are not often perceived of as being in the same rooms together because of the social and academic siloing that can, too often, keep us apart and skeptical of one another. Judy's work is not limited by assumptions, constrictions, or narrow ways of perceiving. We live in a time right now where the work of R.A. Judy couldn't be more essential to how we understand ourselves, how we reiterate our values. Many would have us believe that affirming the diversity of ideas, the illumination of a range of perspectives in honorable and caring ways limits us when, in fact, it helps us to understand aspects of ourselves in each other, more profoundly. Interestingly, many of the same people who eschew diversity of people, how we present ourselves in the world and our understanding of the world, also look at the arts and humanities only as a luxury, as indulgence, as strictly leisure, not work. While the arts can be pleasurable, certainly, their primary purpose is to affirm the human condition, human beingness, and that this extraordinary sensitivity to the demanding, rigorous, scholarly type of love and care we can and should have for each other, even when working through the difficult, the tragic, the traumatic, the wrong, and the horrible. This kind of love and care is critical for us to survive and to live together with lives of deep meaning. We know this very well, this essential nature of art and humanity, the arts, sciences, and humanities, at the Iowa Writers' Workshop and the University of Iowa. We strive to present and support our students in presenting our best, most cultivated, deeply thoughtful, and illuminated selves. Truman Capote, the visionary literary artist and supporter of the arts, endows this wonderful award in the service of his legacy and communities. R.A. Judy's work, him being honored here, is a pinnacle of the IWW and UI's commitment. His work exemplifies an ethics of care for intersecting communities, of deep thought, and the elevation of the least of these. In the deep meditation of freedman Tom Wyndham's 1937 remark, "We should have our liberty 'cause us is human flesh." In his self-reflection regarding his sense of self and place in the world, despite dehumanization, is reflected extraordinarily in sentient flesh and throughout Judy's work. And so ultimately, this demanding, scholarly, soulful, and genius book is a tome of hope, which, in addition to being a thing with feathers, something that lifts itself and lifts us, offers a rich tapestry in which to explore a life of the mind, a sense of ourselves as global citizens where we all matter to each other, where art matters. Philosophy has meaning for everyday people. Literary criticism is a door that lets us into realms, worlds of great depth, joy, and unblinking empathy with sorrow. It is a mellifluous place of learning, confidence in each other, and the loving kindness of a devoted, serious, disciplined, creative soul. Please join me in thanking R.A. Judy for his important work by welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you for that very generous introduction. I wish to thank the Truman Capote Foundation for extending to me this honor. When I received words, I was really quite struck by it because I'm aware of this award and I'm aware of the importance of the Writers' Workshop and was truly flattered that such renowned writers, such careful readers would find my expressions at all worthwhile. I want to contextualize my brief remarks. I have 15 minutes by pointing out that I have worked for the better part of 50 years under an imperative, and it's the imperative that Jibreel first gave Muhammad. Iqra, read. That for me is the motto of our time, to be readers. Call it precious and go to hell. but I believe a story can be wrecked by a faulty rhythm in a sentence. So Truman Capote said to Patty Hill in 1957, adding, "I don't mean to imply that I successfully practice what I preach. I try, that's all." As apt a pronouncement as this is of the formal practice of sentient flesh, the book for which I am being honored with the award bearing Capote's name this afternoon, in all honesty, I cannot say I was even aware of his remark when I sat down with Helen Tarter at its inception over dinner in May 2013. Nevertheless, when she asked me what I was working on, I told her I was trying to critically engage the rhythmic resonances of the polyphyliphenous plethora of poetic works in multiple languages without rendering or reducing or subsuming them to a singular synthesizing composition. Their confluence tracing what I construed at that time and still do as the lineage of radical poetic socialities. In keeping with the rather copious archaic sense of the term poesis, this designation connotes an array of practices of making, the performance of which, whether in writing, sound, or bodily gesture, engender a disposition of being in relation. These practices are constitutively and perpetually kinetic, that is to say, activity in motion, or poetic energia. And I use energia in Aristotle's sense of the term, which following Joe Sachs, we may render in English as being at workness. Regarding poetic practices of making, we may say being in making. Not at all in the instrumental sense of tool or tooling, but in the sense of the vigor of expression manifesting the dynamic activity of representing the world wherein human being exists and lives with relevance. Invoking Aristotle once more, he describes this poetic practice as legien geniotto, saying possibility. In this regard, poetic practice highlights how essential figurative language and symbolic representation are in determining the order of collective experiential perception, whereby we come together through common sensibilities. In the collectively agreed upon distribution of the sensible. This is what is meant by common sense, whether expressed in everyday vernacular idiom or the philosophical sensus communis. In other words, the performative practices of poetic expression disclose the representational symbolic order. And my preferred term for this, for those of you who've read Sentient Flesh, you know this, is semiosis, in which the possibility of community is made. As such, the disposition they articulate is being in making in community. All this I told Helen Tarter at that 2013 dinner, and proposed to essay a practice of criticism that was a performative engagement with the polyrhythmic, polyphonic, poetic socialities, and pointedly not in judgment. A project she was so enthusiastic about, she committed Fordham to it right then and there. And we spent the rest of that evening past midnight sharing stories of our respective engagements with such polyrhythmic practices across the years and the globe. Unfortunately, Helen passed unexpectedly and tragically in March 2014. Nevertheless, the book that became Sentient Flesh 4 years later emerged out of that conversation with her. and after some twists and turns, was taken up by the Black Outdoor series at Duke University Press with great support from J. Cameron Carter, Sarah Severnak, and Ken Wissaker. After all is said and done, this book, Duke University Press and I sent out into the world in 2020, is an essay in practicing poetic polyrhythmic criticism. Now, this is admittedly a skewed sense of criticism in relation to the received mainstream historiography of literary criticism, according to which criticism emerges with the Eudoie, the singers of tales. Recall that when the singer of Theogony, Hesiod, sings of Zeus's defeating Typhoon, from whose many heads came every voice, phone, imaginable, that spoken by the gods as well as bellowing bulls. He claims the rightness of his singing on the divine authority of Zeus's daughters, the Muses. Hesiod's song of Zeus's defeating Typhoon and reducing his polyphony to boisterous winds is perhaps the most explicit paradigm of archaic critical censorship, of excluding from community any discourse not sanctioned by sovereign power. Another famously paradigmatic expression of song as kritike tekne, the art of criticism or critical judgment, as a function of social and sovereign authority, reinforcing the social political order, or what the Greeks called the cosmos, occurs in Book 1 of Homer's Odyssey, where Telemachus chastises his mother Penelope for censoring Phemius for singing a sorrowful song in the dining hall of Odysseus' palace, telling her pointedly that making speeches or telling stories, mythos, is an affair of men, of all men, but I, most of all, for mine is the authority, kratos, in this house. The issue between Penelope and Telemachus was not whether Phemius' song of the Achaeans' return to Troy was woeful. It was about who has the authority to determine what was the suitable song for the occasion, to, as we might say, pick the tune. In this context of archaic oral performance, criticism was concerned with determining the appropriate song most conducive to the desired mood of the occasion. And prepie, the propriety of song to occasion, had to do with the combination of scrupulous observance of the traditional cult rites, prevailing social values, as well as piety, the feeling of awe and anxiety prompted by the gods. The archaic term for this combination was kairos, due measure, meaning the careful preserving of a sense of the appropriate in the shifting situations of human life. In accord with this formulation, criticism is fundamentally about determining propriety. Nor does that fundamental function change with the spread of literacy in 4th and 5th century BC Greece. The shift that does occur in criticism is from emphasizing the performative context of song to the compositional, whereby the singers of tales become milopoi, composers of song. One of the 9 most celebrated of whom, Bacchylides, proclaims that kairos is the aspect of composition that is single best path to achieving poetic excellence. It is with the rhetoricians and philosophers, however, as we know, that propriety is construed wholly in terms of formal text, of the proper association of style and subject, what Horace renders in Latin as decorum, and becomes a principle of classical rhetorical and poetic theory, in opposition to which Augustine articulated his hermeneutics, as did the 17th century moderns. And with their opposition over time, the grounds of sovereign authority shifted to the subjective judgment of the critic, culminating in the aesthetic judgment of Kant's transcendental subject of knowledge. prompting the distinction the Romantics set to us between poet as maker and critic as analyst. Our received authoritative historiography of criticism traces a line of development from Plato and Aristotle, Horace and Longinus, through to Dante, Boccaccio, Du Bellay, Sidney, Dryden, Pope, on to Lessing, Schiller, de Stael, Goethe, Schleiermacher, Coleridge, Shelley, Baudelaire, Mallarmé, and Arnold. Then Ransom, Auerbach, Edmund Wilson, Brooks, Wimsatt, Fry, Wellick, Bloom, and Bourdieu. This, of course, is a truncated list of the stations of the cross. Yet even those efforts to add on new stations of those who somehow challenge the canon, such as Paul Dumas, Julia Kristeva, and Bruno Latour, still remain bound to the conceived origins of criticism in what I will just call, synecdochically, philosophical analysis of poetic expression, or as Aristotle put it even more succinctly, episteme, science. While this historiography literary criticism is one of the beats in the practice of poetic polyrhythmic criticism, it is a tangential one. That is to say, it does not drive the movement of this criticism, which while also emerging with song, that singing is not at all grounded in any transcendent sovereign authority. Polyrhythmic, polyphonic poesis discloses that which enables the members of community to link the discontinuities occurring in the world, bodies, objects, material gestures, discourses, to descriptions, and to relate experience to certain of those descriptions as a feeling of fact. This is a question of conventionality, or might we say, the grammar of community, in the sense of a technology of imagination through which a set of relations to things in reality and each other are articulated as constituting the human world. On this question of the relationship between language, perception, and imagination as a technology of life, which is where the poetic and sociality meet, the American Black novelist Albert Murray, when presenting an account of his practicing literary blues, maintained that poesis represents or expresses human feeling, how humans are constituted affectively, and so what they are aware of. I recall Murray telling Don Noble, thinking about poesis in terms of entropy, that it is a practice of finding form in chaos. It is the use of the endowment James Joyce referred to in Ulysses as the ineluctable modality of the visible. Relating this to polyrhythmic, polyphonic poesis, Murray adds the audible and the conceptual. In other words, it is thinking in disorder. Furthermore, because the poesis is an indeterminate dynamic of form in disorder, it is perpetually reorienting with each innovative performance, without losing the coherence of its play, its momentum. Poesis, then, is in and of community. Bear in mind that our world now consists of a confluence of heterologous communities. And so, insofar as poesis is a practice of finding expression commensurate with the complexities and possibilities of our surroundings, then radical poetic socialities are irreducibly polyphonous, articulating, to paraphrase Jacques Rancière, sensory realities that suggest another sensory reality, which in turn can be perceived as a metaphor of the poetic activity. My term of art for this irreducible polyphony is parasemiosis, denoting the dynamic of differentiation operating in multiple voices and rhythms, confluent without synthesis, articulating a disposition of being in besidedness, wherein criticism occurs. The articulate form of this disposition is widely known as call and response, a practice of democratic participation. If at times both call and response are choral, that chorus does not represent a singular truth of community, but the confluence of multiple voices in a democratic dissonant harmony, a dissensus, whereby what is disclosed is knowing in making in community. If the response is soloist, because poetic sociality is the dynamic entailing an enormous number of possible configurations of the individual performances, any given solo can be regarded as random or indeterminate. The being in besidedness of parasemiosis as a practice of poetic polyrhythmic criticism does not entail a transcendent position of adjudication or legitimacy, whether occasional or aesthetic. Murray helps us to understand this performative style not as a projection of the primal unity of subjective will or ego, but as the eventful dynamic of perpetually transitive and transitional consciousness. I'll note, in concluding, that the practice of poetic polyrhythmic criticism is not interpolated in the current debates about the value of criticism, meaning not only the arguments, the Felsky arguments of post-critique, but also more recent attempts aligned with it that seek to redeem criticism by way of expressed idealism, the proper location of which is imagination and affirmative hope. The grounds on which these debates are being waged is precisely that of the sovereign subject of knowledge, presumed to be the best basis for a democratic socio-political order. Indeed, radical poetic socialities are constitutively apositional to synthetic political order, and hence are incommensurate with propriety. Claude McKay's performance of what he called vagabondage might serve as an exemplary instance, and as was his wont, in the form of a sonnet entitled Baptism. Into the furnace let me go alone. Stay you without in terror of the heat. I will go naked in, for 'tis sweet. Into the weird depths of the hottest zone, I will not quiver in the frailest bone. You will not note a flicker of defeat. My heart shall tremble, not its fate to meet. My mouth give utterance to any moan. The yawning oven spits forth fiery spears. Red apish tongues shout wordlessly my name. Desire destroys, consumes my mortal fears, transforming me into a shape of flame. Or maybe Curtis Mayfield's We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, which is more plaintive than McKay's sonnet, but so too more expressly concerned with the non-reactionary force of poetic expression. We the people who are darker than blue, don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. These are the songs sung beyond the pale of sovereign subjectivity. Much like Ralph Ellison's rhythmatical, zoot-suited boys who are men outside of historical time, who were men of transition, whose faces were immobile. These rhythmical, elaborately stylized beings are incomprehensible and uncomprehending, which means that they cannot be persuaded of their inequality. It is not that they make sounds that have no voice and do not signify. Their voice is soundless. It is not a cacophonous noise transformed into reasonable speech through the action of civil discourse. Their jive talk is not the force of a new deal. It does not articulate a conflict over the terms of order and distribution. It is the articulation of a spontaneous thinking and action of community, becoming, ever becoming polyphonous. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Please join us and Professor Judy, Professor Morris, Provost Kriegel, myself, for a champagne reception in honor of this year's Truman Capote Award for Literary Criticism in memory of Newton Arvin. Thanks.